Welcome back to Retro Wednesday, the Tygra Hanger. This is Mike, and today I want to talk to you about the Super 7 reaction figures for Thundercats. These figures are both good and bad. They have good points to them, they've got bad points to them. They are 5 points of articulation, and they're $18. There's good and bad going on. I'll explain all that. The packaging is great and very reminiscent of the vintage line, but do you keep them in the package? Do you open them? Is the $18 price point too much? We're going to talk about all of this. And then how will they work with the KidWorks display if you're into that? Coming up. So I've been pondering the point of the reaction line for a while, and Thundercats is kind of a line that I quit collecting. I rage quit collecting, and I'll probably talk about that in another video. But I'm kind of easing back into it just a little bit. But these figures are supposed to be kind of like, what if they made figures, if Kenner made every other toy line, and they all sort of match each other in style and size and deco, and this is kind of a rough looking Darth Vader, but you see they have that vinyl cape going on to kind of mimic and copy the originals from back in the day, and the style with the 5 POA, but I do think they have very enhanced design. They look so much better than a figure that would have come out back in the day, and they do have some stances to them, so I'm going to talk about all that as I go through each one of these characters. Since we have Mumm-Ra the Ever-Living here, we're going to go ahead and talk about him first. Now, first of all, he does have a nice head sculpt, and his helmet is in there. So it looks pretty good going down further. He's got a lot of paint on the inside here, and his cape is double-sided, like 2 different colors. It's red and black. It almost could be like 2 different capes glued together. I don't know. I don't know how they achieve that effect. That's really awesome. I like that. You do have kind of some color that moves right into the hip right there, and a nice shiny gold on him. So all around, he looks pretty good. He's got quite a bit of a muscular architecture, which I think they just reused this buck on a lot of them. But I don't know, that's kind of molded in too, and it looks different than the rest. So, but really, it's kind of cool that they make this, they do this. And I did get most of these used, so they're a little bit beat up, but it's still kind of nice to have, and it's kind of fun and get them cheaper. Now, the thing about these 2 accessories, they're very reminiscent of the vintage accessories that came with them. So let's take a look at him next to the vintage version. So here he is next to the vintage version, and the accessories do mirror it. The color scheme sort of mirrors it. This helmet is completely removable on the vintage guy, and he had a light-up gimmick and all that. But it's still kind of cool that they made this one, and he does look real reminiscent of him, and in a way, looks a little bit better and more like the show. They haven't made Mama, the little companions, just yet, but it's still kind of cool. So the last thing about Mumm-Ra is I was starting to wonder if these accessories would work on these KidWorks ones. Now, seeing as how the KidWorks accessories are kind of hard to come by, and if you're into it at all, maybe this is a way to get an accessory so they would look okay. So looks like his little sword there, or his little dagger, would work with your KidWorks figure. And yeah, some people don't like KidWorks, but they are kind of interesting, and they're part of the era gone by. Let's look at the old Mumm-Ra, the decrepit form Mumm-Ra. And he does look pretty good. Now, he is kind of, sort of inspired in a way by Anakin of Kenner, and then kind of how they did the Emperor and those kinds. And there's his staff, which looks kind of cool. It's a nice big old staff for him. And these come with like 1, maybe 2 accessories. Not as many as the vintage figures did, but still, he is just pretty much what you'd expect from him, and he does look good standing there. Now, I do want to kind of compare him next to the KidWorks one, which is, a lot of this makes me think of the KidWorks, and it is an improvement in my opinion. I think the KidWorks is really just a statue, which all of them really are. But this, you have a little bit of articulation with the head and the arms and the legs, and actually keeping leg articulation is almost a detriment for some of these figures, but we'll get into that as we look at some of these other figures that have standing problems. But looking at this, Mumm-Ra, the old version, looks pretty good. And here's the old Mumm-Ra versus vintage Mumm-Ra. I didn't grab his staff, but staff looks quite similar. Pretty good. A nice likeness to the toy and the cartoon. So looking at Jackalman next, this is kind of 2 situations going on here. First of all, his stance, his pose is just crazy. He looks pretty cool. He looks interesting. He's a lighter color than I would expect. But yeah, he does look interesting. But he's got a kind of weird squatty pose. And I don't like it. I just don't like the pose they put him in. I think they wanted them all to look a little bit different. But he looks very, very similar to Monkian, we're going to see here in just a little bit. But here is his accessory, which looks kind of cool. It's got a little spike on it right there, so it's a little bit different. And then if you were to say the KidWorks Jackalman, okay, is this supposed to be Jackalman? I don't know, I guess. But if you wanted to use this club, you can figure out a way to make that club work, I guess. Kind of an idea that I had when I picked these up. I thought maybe I could just use the accessories if need be. But anyway, still looks pretty cool, and he's hard to stand. So standing him is a bit of a challenge. It's not impossible, and since they're 5 POA, it's much easier than if he was like 17 voice articulation or 33. Here's Jackalman next to his vintage counterpart, which they just look so different to me. To me, they just look way different, and so I don't know which one I like better. 3 versions that all look completely different. Strange. Okay, so we're going to go from one goofy pose to another goofy pose, and we're looking at Monkian, which he has his morning star right here, so he can swing it around. And all this brightness is washing out his face, but face looks kind of interesting. He does have, again, like I said, the pose, but I like the colors on him. I think he looks pretty good. And so, yeah, there is Monkian, and I think here is the Monkian with Kidworks, and I'm sure you could use that, but the cord is so long it might drag on the ground. Anyway, still kind of cool. Let's see what he looks like next to his vintage counterpart. So here he is next to the vintage counterpart. I don't have his morning star on him, but looking at that, they do look quite different. So this one has like a lot of white going on right in this area, lighter legs and skin tone than this one here. So they are going for as tune accurate as possible and still have the 5 POA and kind of look at that Kenner look too. And of course, no swinging arm gimmick. So, and I like the fact that they don't have removable helmets, because removable helmets on vintage and tracing them down is kind of a pain. Next up is Slithe, and this one actually looks really cool. I like the look of this figure. I like the colors they use. I like his accessory, his weapon. This one, and I think Slithe in Super 7 all around, the Ultimates one looks good. This one looks good. It works really well. And so with it being 3.75, he does actually have articulation in his tail, so he's 6 POA. I like that. That's pretty cool. So a good looking figure overall. Let's do a quick comparison of him to this one right here. So this is the Kidworks comparison, and as you can see, the axe looks more like a real axe and more tune accurate than what they did with the Kidworks, and more accurate probably. I don't know. It's pretty close to the vintage one, but right there, if you're missing the axe, I'm sure this one would work just fine. If you're thinking along the lines I am, like, hey, let's replace those. But let's check them out next to the vintage. Alright, so here he is next to the vintage version, and comparing their accessories is one kind of thing. The vintage accessory, actually, I think was pretty spot on with the show, or I liked it. I thought it was pretty good. You knew it's an axe or whatever, but maybe it isn't exactly like the show. But side by side, they do look somewhat different. Like, there's a big old hunchback on this guy on the vintage one, and it's not really so much hunchbacked here. So maybe it's not exactly like it should be, but it still looks pretty cool. It still looks good overall, and I like it. I mean, maybe I even kind of like it better than the vintage version, but looking pretty good. The last of the bad guys, or the mutants, is the Grune the Destroyer. And looking at the card back art, it's kind of nice to keep one carded, I guess. So he does look pretty good. He does come with only one accessory, which would be this mace of his, and he looks like you'd expect from the show, and he is a cool character in the show. He does have both of his fangs, which I think there's another version that only has one fang. I might be mistaken, but I think there's like 2 different versions, a 1 fang version and a 2 fang version. So anyhow, I know Super 7 is going to make a whole lot of different variations like they did with He-Man, but let's do a quick comparison to the vintage. The vintage one is just so stout, he just like, I'll hold this card back up for you. So the vintage one does look pretty cool, but it's a different color scheme that's going on completely with how they did with this guy. So maybe the other version that has one tooth, if that's true, will have this color scheme. So if you like this color scheme or that color scheme, you just go with the one you like, go with the one you know, and there it is. See, they didn't include the brass knuckle piece. Okay, so getting into the Snowman guy, here we go with him, and there's his head sculpt. Looks pretty nice. Kind of sad, kind of solemn. He does have a removable helmet. The only one that I know of that has a removable helmet. Now, I don't quite like the fact that it has a removable helmet, but I won't be losing mine. But still, it would have been nice if they didn't have a removable helmet. But then for this character, you couldn't get that look on his face. Like, just look at that face. So I can see why they did it, and so I guess I'm happy with it. But let's do a quick comparison of him to his vintage version. I don't have his staff. Here's a comparison of him to the vintage version, and yeah, there's the big old staff that goes with it. So it looks pretty cool. I don't have his shield, and I think he's probably supposed to come with a shield too. Don't have that either. So let me look at this card back. If you look at the card back, you're going to notice that he's only supposed to come with like this little spear, no shield, but doesn't show his helmet in there either, unless I'm looking at it wrong. And then this does show 2 waves, so there's only a total of 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 figures so far. And the one I don't have is this guy right here. But yeah, it does kind of look the part. He looks more toon accurate than the vintage figure did. So getting into the good guys here, we have Tygra, which is a pretty cool looking figure. So he does look like he's a cat person running around in his underwear. So that's pretty much what they look like. And he has a whip. Now this whip actually has 3 little balls on it. So cool. And he's got some gold trim right here, which is kind of cool. And I really do think they did a great job with the line work and the hair and all that kind of stuff. So it does show really well. It does work really well. Now some people had tried to say that the paint isn't very sharp where it shows the cat for the Thundercats. I think the paint's really sharp on him. So I think he looks pretty good overall. He's what I expect. Let's do a comparison to vintage. Now there are 2 versions of the vintage Tygra. There's the old Tygra and the young Tygra, and I don't have their whips, but looking at them, it looks like a blend between the 2, actually. It looks closer to the young Tygra than the old Tygra, but kind of a blend between the 2, and it works really well. And I think this actually is more toon accurate than either one of these. So next up, taking a look at Cheetara, and so there's a couple of things different about her. She is a female, so she's kind of made a little bit smaller, and she does have her stick here, her baton, her bow, staff, and her hair is wind-swept. And let's see if we can zoom in on that face sculpt. And there's a lot of nice paint on that face. A lot of nice paint apps on the hair, the face, the chest piece, which kind of blends into her whatever. But there it is. And on the back, so you got like kind of a flesh right here, and then sort of clothing right there, and then kind of a leotard thing right there. There is a lot of writing on the back there. But anyhow, there she is. She looks pretty good. Let's see what she looks like next to the vintage. So looking at her next to the vintage, I think they did a pretty good job on the vintage figure, just capturing the look of the character. And this does just kind of take it to the next level. And one of the big differences is that they did carry over kind of the way they did the legs with the V shape in the legs, kind of like they did with the vintage figure. So they carried that over. And the reason they did that is to give her that feminine look. It would break the sculpt to try to go up and down and then try to paint different areas. So that's good, but I don't think they're going to make any vehicles. But some people do complain that if they make vehicles, she won't fit in the vehicle. Next up is Jaga, and I think Jaga does look really good. He does come with a sword, which is different. So I think in the vintage, they just made a copy of Lion-O's sword, and there he was. And in the vintage, he had a helmet this hat that removed. This does not remove, thank goodness. That little thing would just disappear. And it would add to the cost, which was already $18. Anyway, it does have a nice sharp Thundercat symbol on him. He does have some spike things on his arm there, and his leotard looking thing going on. And his vinyl cape, which I don't see that it's so much removable. I would not try to remove it. That's the last thing I'd want to do with it. But aside from that, he looks pretty good. Let's see what he looks like next to a vintage version. So this is probably, say, the rarest figure from the vintage line that they made into the modern. So they are going after a lot of the rarer figures in their Ultimates line, in the bigger figure line, which makes a lot of sense. And I'll talk more about that in my Why I Rage Quit Thundercats video, and now sort of getting back into it. But looking at this guy here, it does look pretty good. See, my Jaga doesn't like to stand, so there's problems there. But there are some differences, like he's got green here where this is yellow, and but overall they match really close, pretty good. This is yellow, this is silver, but this figure himself, like trying to track that hat down, that's enough to make you want to rage quit. So glad they didn't do something like that with this guy, and it looks pretty good for the reaction version. So the last one on the list is Lion-O, and to sort of save the best for last, I sort of did that because he does look really good. Now he has his symbol right here on his waist, on his belt, and then he's got the windswept hair look going on. The expression, I don't think it's really that great. It's almost like he's bored with life. That's probably the worst part of this figure, but the whole uniform and the 2 swords that he's got, it's like before it grows and then when it grows. if you know what I mean. And he's got a removable hand piece, this removable glove, which doesn't want to, okay, yeah, it doesn't come all the way off if you got a sword in his hand, but overall, still really good, really good. And I think that you could use one of these with your KidWorks version, if that's something you choose. They don't have a KidWorks Jaga, so, or a Snowman, so I've been kind of not comparing those for the last few figures, but I think he looks great. Let's see what he looks like next to the vintage version, and see how well they capture the vintage in 3.75. Here he is next to the vintage version, and there's a lot of very good similarities here. This is more of an orange. This is more of a real skin tone that you would see more from the show in reality, I guess. But looking at them side by side, it's just a more modern, upgraded version of what we got here, except it's 3.75, and they still have the same level of articulation. Of course, this has that action gimmick and his eyes light up, but still, I mean, really, the articulation is the same in most of these figures that they were back in the day. So what are my final thoughts on the Reaction Super 7 version of Thundercats? I think they're pretty good. In fact, they are way better than I thought they would be aesthetically. But unless you just want to have statues on your shelf, the background with the KidWorks playsets look great, and I'm actually going to put the KidWorks figures right alongside with them and fill it out like that, so it's going to look like a nice full display of figures. It's going to look good on a shelf, and I like that. As for if I just kept them all carded like this guy, they would just be in a box and I would absolutely never ever see them, kind of like what I'm doing with the Transformers Reaction. So overall, I'm not in on every Reaction line. I am in on this one, and if they keep making more, I don't think they're worth $18 a piece, so I'm going to have a lot of trouble spending that. I'll probably wait for a sale, but if there's specific characters I really want, I probably will pay the money. Like I got Anthro pre-ordered, so of course I've got to get that to fill out the 12 that are here already. And the funny thing about this line is if you watch eBay, you can get a deal. You could buy a group of these already, somebody already has them, and they're selling them off for pretty much half what they paid for whatever reason, loose or carded. I've seen it both ways, so that's the best way to get this in my opinion. But going forward, like, how are we supporting $18 5 POA figures? Because they don't make very many. They're what they make's what they make, and they kind of move on, and I don't think they're going to go back and do other production runs of them, but I could be wrong there. So anyway, if you like these, you're in on them, you might want to get on them. BBTS has actually got a sell on the He-Man stuff because Super 7 sort of lost the license of that, so there's no more He-Man getting made by Super 7. So I'm going to be doing He-Man here in a few weeks when I get those in. Let me know what you think about the Reaction figures. What do you think about the Thundercats? And should I work on doing more vintage Thundercat stuff? Like and subscribe to David Hanger out.
Look around. This is all for the Thundercats.
Like my art collection?
Free my friends from those pictures.
It is just like you, an evil twin, your mirror image. Think